Look, at the end of the day, I think Israel is trying to send a very strong message that the period when Israel could be targeted, its citizens could be targeted, what they're feeling now is kind of ad infinitum, and their adversaries can walk freely in cities where they're provided safe haven are over. The Israelis have been saying for a very long time that the problem is not actually Hamas or Hezbollah or the Houthis or the Hashd al-Shabi, but it's Iran. And I think one of the key things that draws together Fuad Shukr and Ismail Haniyeh, even though Shukr is very, very, very operational and Haniyeh is very, very, very political, is that they were both key interlocutors for their organizations on their issue set with Iran. Removing Fuad Shukr actually has some real operational implications for Hezbollah. There's no single point of failure, but it also comes on the heels of some 400 other Hezbollah operatives, including some very senior regional commanders were assassinated. 400 pinpricks makes a hole, and then you pull at that string, which is what Fuad Shukr is, and that hole becomes a lot bigger. For Ismail Haniyeh, first of all, he wasn't as moderate as some press is making him out to be, but as the public face, that was his job. But he was unique in that he was a Gaza person who'd been in Gaza not so long ago, had very good ties to the Iranians. He has 3 deputies, none of whom can easily step up. Musa Marzouk is from Rafah originally, but hasn't been to Gaza in a million years. Jabri is just took over for Aruri. He's too new to the job, and he's up there. And the others don't have Gaza ties. So this actually, both of these strikes will have some impact in terms of those organizations' ability to do the things they're doing. One operationally, one politically. My concern in the immediate is for the hostages, and I don't think that this torpedoes prospects for a Gaza deal, because I think that the factors that were driving Sinwar in Gaza and Netanyahu in Israel towards the deal remain. I think that that's not going to happen today or tomorrow. That's going to be paused, clearly. And the immediate question, and what this will end, is kind of what the retaliation will be. I think Iran is going to want to keep this as contained as possible, because Iran does not want this fight to come on a more regular basis into Iran's borders. I could see Iran telling Hezbollah, feel free to do a little more than you might have done just after Fuad Shukr was killed, because there are really 2 sets of dynamics that are restraining Hezbollah from full-scale war. One of those is Iran saying, keep the powder dry, because your rockets are our best deterrent against an Israeli or someone else, an attack on our nuclear program. I could see them saying Hezbollah do something more, short of full-scale war still, but something more. But I think that this is an account that will be open. And as it just so happens, on August 7th, we have an event where we're going to be launching a new interactive map on Iran's external operations that we've been working on for 2.5 years. And I would expect that that type of activity is what we're going to see increase even more now. Iranians doing things that they believe are a little bit of an arm's reach, a little bit of reasonable deniability. And that means that a little more instability of that kind moving forward, but not the kind of regional war that some are fearing. So let me stop there for introductory remarks.
Thank you. And I actually don't really have much more to add than what Matt said, but just kind of touching on a couple of points that Matt raised. One is, this is a very significant symbolic, I'm talking about Haniyeh in particular. This is a very significant symbolic attack, but it's not going to have any real operational implications. The decisions during the war were made by Sinwar. Haniyeh was not really part of that. In the longer term, though, it does create a leadership vacuum. As Matt said, Haniyeh was unique, not only, by the way, the fact that he was one of the founding generation of Hamas, that he was from Gaza, but also he was one of actually few people who had good relations with Iran in the political level. Israel has already killed the main contact with Iran earlier this year in January, Saleh Aruri. Now, when you got to choose the next person who will lead Hamas, there isn't anyone who is senior, who is acceptable in Tehran. Mish'al is persona non grata, and Abu Marzouk has other kind of liabilities. Now, what can Hamas do really in response? Not much. We are in the middle of war. Whatever Hamas could have done would have already done. Hamas, since the morning, has been trying to get people in the West Bank to take action. We already saw a terror attack in the Hebron area, but so far this has not really translated into any mass mobilization or any mass protests. We've seen some protests in the West Bank, but nothing major. This Hamas will have no choice right now but to step away from the hostage talks in the short term. But that, in my view, will be only performative. At the end of the day, the calculation of Sinwar, who is the one that matters, have not really changed. And once things die down, they will find a quiet way to go back in. The question is Israel willing to go forward with the hostage talks, or does Bibi feel that he's now the trajectory is working in his interest and he should wait a bit? And with this, I will end.
Just on Hamas's response, there's not actually tons Hamas can do. There are two things they can do. One is under Salah al-Aruri, Hamas built up a operational component in Lebanon, and I expect that some of the rockets that we'll see coming from Lebanon won't be just by Hezbollah. You'll see Hamas doing things from Lebanon as well. That Hamas operational component in Lebanon is also the element that was giving orders to the two different Hamas teams that tried to carry out, for the first time ever, terrorist plots in Europe over the past few months. Only once, maybe twice before, depending on how you count, did Hamas ever come close to carrying out an external operation. And I could see Hamas now saying, okay, the Israelis have gone too far, and this kind of pushing them, or at least some within Hamas, to say we should be doing more external operations.
It's not obvious at all. Hamas has basically been split, really, I would say, since 2017 between two components. You have the center of gravity right now is in Gaza, but then you have the external leadership, Khalid Mashal, Abu Marzouk, some of these names. And while the center of gravity was in Gaza, they needed to find a compromise candidate. And this is exactly what Haniyeh was. Right now, there is no one who has the same credentials as Haniyeh, someone who is from Gaza, who is part of the founding generation, and most importantly right now, who can maintain relations with Iran. So I think there is lack of clarity. I suspect what we will see right now is a leadership vacuum, basically for a while, saying we're going to be working and coming up with a successor. And again, in many ways, it doesn't matter because all of the relevant decisions were actually made by Sinwar in Gaza, not by Haniyeh. So they can afford some vagueness on this point.
Look, I think things changed. Let's just go chronologically with the strike in Majd al-Shams. And U.S. authorities understood there had to be a response. There's going to be a response. They're pushing very, very hard for it not to be targeting Beirut kind of writ large, critical infrastructure. The Israelis were saying it's going to be big. It's going to be big. They wanted it to be targeted. And I think that the strike in Tehran really was more of an opportunity, given the inauguration of the president and the way so much of that was being kind of orchestrated around Israel. And they had an opportunity. I don't know if this is something, we'll never know if this is something the Israelis were planning for a long time, and now's when it came together. These things are impossible to know. I don't think that this actually torpedoes these diplomatic efforts. In some ways, I think it's going to give them impetus. Now, I don't know if it's going to be 2 or 3 days or 2 or 3 weeks or whatever it is. There's going to be responses. Hamas is going to be angry. Hezbollah is going to be angry. Iran is going to be angry. But at the end of the day, again, those dynamics that are drawing both Hamas and Netanyahu and Hezbollah and Israel Netanyahu towards wanting to calm this down in some way, I think actually haven't changed in some ways for the Hamas and the Hezbollahs and the Irans. Like, it's a little bit more acute right now. Like, Hezbollah has long said that they've achieved deterrence against Israel. I think Israel's going a long way to show that's not entirely true. And to the extent Hezbollah, Hamas, Iran believe that, they believe that the Israelis are going to be more aggressive in acts like these moving forward. Like, they don't want this to go in that direction. Again, I'm not trying to make this to paper over everything. I'm not convinced that Iran is going to start firing 300 projectiles at Israel again, or that Hezbollah is going to do something that Hamas can do anything that in the next few weeks is going to change things. I do think that moving forward in general, we're going to see more terrorist attacks targeting Israelis abroad, etc. The Israelis will tell you we're seeing that day in, day out anyway. And I think that there is still very, very much an opportunity, not this morning or tomorrow or next week, to be able to kind of leverage this to tamper down some of the tensions, in part because these weren't Israeli massive strikes destroying a neighborhood. These were, frankly, the types of things that the administration has been telling Israel they need to do more. If you're going to do things, make them as targeted as possible, targeting the bad guys.
Look, I mean, first of all, I just want to highlight again, emphasize the point that Matt said. The timing really was not, was not initiated by Israel. The timing was initiated by the attack on Majd al-Shams. That said, I would, it's not like we were on the verge of a breakthrough in the hostage talks. Already last week, the Israelis have hardened their positions. Bibi has introduced new things, and that was subject to a lot of debate in Israel itself. And Bibi has, for a while now, his position has been the more military pressure on Hamas, the more is the likelihood of a breakthrough. So I think this will actually strengthen his hand in the domestic Israeli debate about this. But I actually agree at the bottom line with Matt. Hamas, or again, the one who decides on this is Sinwar and people on the ground, and their calculation is basically based on whether or not that they see the trajectory of the war coming in their favor or not. For a while, they thought that was the case. I think after the killing of Deif, things started to change. After Israel took over Philadelphia, things started to change. The killing of Haniyeh just does not impact this. Yes, they have to step out, but as we saw in the past, when the Israelis killed Aruri, who was a much bigger deal in operational terms, the Israelis came back. Hamas came back to the negotiations. The same with the killing of Deif. So I just don't see this impacting it. It will delay it. But I just, what will impact it more is what is the nature of my view, the Iranian and Hezbollah response, and whether we're going to be dragged into a wider conflict or whether this is going to just be a blip and then we're back to focus on Gaza. There's no confirmation, but all indications are that he's dead. This is the working assumption. That said, of course, that's what the working assumption 7 times in the past, but this one seems more serious.
Good question. There's been a lot of academic research on this. That basically says no, it over time doesn't have much of an effect. And my caveat to that is that it's almost never the case that in the moment those types of actions are trying to have an overtime effect. They're trying to change something in the moment. And I believe very strongly that some targeted assassinations make more sense and some make no sense at all. And it tends to be very, very operational. These two instances are very, very different. They're the polar ends of the spectrum. The one, Fuad Shukr, is extremely operational. And again, no single point of failure, but taking out Fuad Shukr will make a difference. Not to Hezbollah's ability to continue to fire 150,000 rockets, not to the Radwan's ability to, regular, not special forces currently surrounding Metula, where I was a week and a half ago. None of that in the moment, but very, very, very significant in lots of ways, not least of which is that he was responsible for basically all of the sophisticated weapons systems, the surface to sea, the precision guided missiles, the drones, all of that. But it mostly because after Mohammed Deif was killed in 2008, after Mustafa Badruddin was killed a few years later in Syria by Iran, by the way, not by the Israelis, Hezbollah started having this kind of Islamic Jihad leadership by committee with Fuad Shukr first among equals, and Shukr was the key person to the Iranians. And so that was a very critical thing. On the On the Hamas side, again, I think the common denominator here is Ismail Haniyeh from a political side was, again, the key interlocutor with the Iranians. Iran has now lost two of its key personnel that it was comfortable working with. And Ismail Haniyeh's assassination is not intended to have a change within Hamas, certainly not operationally. It's just supposed to say we're holding people accountable for those who were involved in October 7th, and we're striking at the relationship between Iran and its proxies. It's a message more than anything else. As a message, I think it will be effective. As an operational impact, Fuad Shukr's will be effective. Long term, even short term, neither of them is going to undermine Hezbollah or Hamas.
Look, just quickly on the Haniyeh side, because I mean, yes, maybe long term, I don't know, we can debate this, but these decisions are not made with a long term in view. They're made in a specific context. And right now, I would say there are three contexts that the Haniyeh killing would impact. One is obviously the question of accountability that the Israelis have been consistent about since October 7th. But two is an internal Israeli context. You know, my conversation with Israelis over the last couple of months show a change in the public attitude there from a sense of momentum that we had earlier this year to almost a sense that of stalemate, and some even Israelis who I've talked to basically say we're losing this war. I think this helps reshape some of this particular narrative. But also on the other side, Hamas has also been pushing a narrative that they are winning this war, and this will be a big blow to this narrative.
I don't think that it means that an attack won't happen. I think it means that there's a command and control gap of a very significant nature. He wasn't just on the Jihad Council. He was one of the most important people on the Jihad Council. He was Nasrallah's guy on the Jihad Council. That's why the Israelis called him the number two. And some people thought, wait, was Naim Qassem killed also? Because he's the actual number two? No, it was just that operationally, he was the number two guy reporting directly to Nasrallah. Naim Qassem was off to the side. And again, I think because he was such a key person in terms of their interlocutor operationally with the Iranians. You'll remember, I think it was 2019, the Israelis released information in these infographics about Iran's provision of precision-guided munitions and kits. And the Hezbollah point contact for all this was Fuad Shukr. So I think they've taken out someone who just played a very central role in a lot of different things, and he was the boss for a lot of sensitive things.
I actually don't know. I mean, this has put Iran in a very difficult position. Either respond or be shown as all of the threats. Because remember, after the Syria incident, they were very clear in saying any attacks on our territory will be met by a response to Israel. Yes, this is not an Iranian, etc., but it happened in their territory in a very humiliating way, in the middle of an inauguration, etc., etc. So I think it puts them in a dilemma. I understand the sense that they don't want to be dragged into a war. I'm just not sure that they can withstand this without doing anything. This cannot be, we will respond at the time of our choosing.
That's old news now.
It's old news.
I mean, how many times can Israel, steal the Iranian nuclear file, assassinate scientists, put an automatic weapon on a highway, like evergreen. I do think that Ghaith's point is important. It's very embarrassing for Iran, especially after they had this big warning. But at the end of the day, this was not an Iranian person, and they don't want this to escalate to something that goes into their border. The Iranians are very, very sensitive and pay a lot of attention to symmetry and proportionality. So if I'm an Iranian leader, my feeling is that, it's open game on leadership. And I would be concerned, therefore, if I were Israeli security, on the security of Israeli leaders, diplomats, etc. And I would anticipate, not as an and or, but I think it's a given that Iranian international terrorism, Hezbollah, maybe even Hamas, picks up now because they'll see that as, you did things abroad, we did things abroad. Remember Nasrallah after Imad Mughniyeh was killed in 2008, saying at Mughniyeh's funeral because Haniyeh was killed in Syria, which is outside at the time, outside the traditional fighting area. He said, fine, you want open war, we'll give you open war. I think the Iranians are looking at this and saying much the same, not in terms of literally war, but in terms of the terrorist activity. There will be responses. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some rockets, some drones, especially drones, but I don't anticipate this being massive strikes that of the type that could spill over into war.
Look, maybe just on a tangent here. I mean, an interesting, and maybe this is too much in the weeds, but an interesting dynamic that I've seen in the public discourse on this is a lot of the kind of critics of Hamas, the Sunni organization, being too close to the Iranian Shia regime, basically are pushing the narrative that Iran basically sold out Haniyeh. There's no basis in reality to this, but this is a kind of puts Iran in a defensive position vis-a-vis the kind of Middle Eastern discourse. I don't see it. I really don't see it. Again, they've been very clear, the Israelis, that they will be targeting the Hamas leaders. This was an opportunity. I think there's a reason why it did not happen in Qatar. That would have been really the end of the talks, but it happened in Iran in the context of the Majd al-Shams attack. What I have seen is, accusation of Bibi that he wants to scuttle the talks by hardening the position last week. But this one, I think there was an opportunity, and this was part of their response. I don't see it, and they don't need to do this if they want to scuttle the deal.
Yeah, I agree. There's no question the Israelis hardened their stance a little bit, and they did that because they felt that Hamas was they realized that Hamas was recently under more pressure than they had been, which was true. I understand the analysis that says that's Bibi trying to scuttle it. I don't think it was. It was risky, but I don't think it was. And I think this is something different. And it's not a new kind of phenomenon for the Israelis to kind of put these types of things in parallel baskets and say, we're not going to be restrained taking out people who are presenting a threat to us by other things that are going on. Obviously, this is the biggest concern of the moment is for the hostages, both in terms of their safety in the moment, either Hamas as an organization deciding to retaliate by killing some people, or just Hamas captors, whoever the guy is in the apartment or in the tunnel getting angry and doing something, like appears to have been the case with some right-wing Israeli reservists against Hamas people. Secondly, as we've already discussed, in terms of prolonging or delaying the prospects for actual hostage release in the context of a deal. That must have been a very difficult conversation. Depends what this is. I think that Israel has been putting together target lists of potential things they could do vis-a-vis Hezbollah for some time now. Months ago, I wrote a piece for the Institute on Hezbollah's escalation ladder, which, by the way, remains true to today. Israel also has its escalation ladder in response to Hezbollah's. Again, we don't know if the targeting of Fuad Shukr was, we don't know if it was, they finally had the opportunity or not. But Fuad Shukr was someone who's in the Israelis. And by the way, our U.S. sites for years, he goes back to the 1983 bombings. In terms of Haniyeh, I see this as separate from Majd al-Shams. I think that this is something different. I think it's related, of course, but I think that this was an opportunity to take out the senior political leader of Hamas, one of the people they believe is responsible for October 7th, and to send a message, as I said earlier, that actually it's not only Hamas or Hezbollah or Houthis, this is actually about Iran. And again, the common thread between Shukr and Haniyeh is that each of them in their own capacities, one operational, one political, was one of the most important interlocutors for their organization with Iran.
Yeah, though I do believe that the Majd al-Shams situation and the reaction does provide a context for this. This is not the first time that Haniyeh has been in Tehran since the war. He was there for Rais's funeral, etc. I think the what's happened in Lebanon creates the context where this is possible. Of course, who knows about the operational side of it, but certainly politically speaking, this was an opportune moment for Israel.